I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is my winter TBR. Now, I love pulling together these seasonal TBRs, even if I'm not the greatest at getting to all of the books on them. My track record has not been stellar. But fall was okay. I've gotten to 3 of those books so far, and the other 3 I should finish by the end of December. So fingers crossed on that one. But when it comes to like fall and winter, which are 2 of my favorite seasons, my reading really takes a cue from the weather and those particular seasons. So in winter, I really enjoy reading books that are set in sort of wintry settings, like colder climes, as it were. I really enjoy reading those like emotionally heavy books, which I know makes no sense when 'tis the season to be jolly, but for me, there's nothing nicer than curling up in a big fuzzy blanket with a cup of hot chocolate and reading a book that is going to emotionally wreck me. Because I am a glutton for punishment, let's be real. And then also, I really like curling up with tomes, but tomes I kind of read throughout the year, so maybe that one doesn't so much take a cue from the season. Anyway, I did want to talk about some books that I want to try to read over the next couple of months. Hopefully get to them before spring comes a-knocking, whenever that is, March 19th, 20th, 21st, one of those dates. But why don't we dive right in? So right off the bat, this winter TBR of mine would not be complete without at least one book that was set in Russia. And I actually have 2 of those. The first of which is Winter Garden by Kristin Hannah. This is a book that I have very nearly unhauled multiple times. And at this point, it's like, Brittany, either read it or unhaul it. But I do think I've been a little bit hesitant because of how hyped Kristin Hannah is as a historical fiction writer. I know when I unhauled The Nightingale that there was a bit of an uproar in the comment section. A lot of people loved that book, but I honestly, hype gives me hives, so it has put me off reading any of her books. But I do feel like this is the one that if I were going to like it, if I were gonna love it, this would probably be it because of the setting and because I feel like this is one of her less hyped books. I don't really hear many people talk about it, but it is set during World War II in Russia, and it seems to be about like mother-daughter relationships, which I find fascinating since, you know, I'm somebody's daughter and I have a mother and I'm very close with her. So I do really like those types of dynamics, even when those dynamics sometimes go sour in books. So everything about this seems really, really promising, and I figured, why not? Basically, if I don't get to it during the winter, it's going to end up being unhauled, because I think I've saved it from being unhauled like 3 or 4 times at this point. The next book is a Russian translation. It is Russian lit, and I love Russian lit. It is Jacob's Ladder by Lyudmila Utaliskaya, and this is a very recent Russian translation. I think it's from like 2015, 2016, but I am very excited that it's written by a woman. I love Russian literature, but admittedly most of what I've read up until this point has been written by men. So a female author here made me very, very excited, but this seems to be like a sprawling family saga that's going to cover basically the entirety of the 20th century. I think it's from like the 1900s to like the 1970s, and considering everything that was going on in Russia during that time period, like so much history condensed into a century with the world wars, the revolutions, communism, just everything, I don't see how this can't be gripping and can't potentially become a new favorite of mine, because it just sounds so, so good. But also there was a line that I saw on the back of this book that so got my attention and was definitely what sold me on it. But it's with a scale worthy of Tolstoy. It asks how much control any of us have over our lives, and how much is in fact determined by history, by chance, or indeed by the genes passed down by the generations that have preceded us into the world. Like, what? I am so excited for this. I haven't owned this for very long, but it has been staring at me from the bookcase and I need to read it. Stat. Next, we have a couple of books set in those colder climes that I was talking about, with one that was actually on my winter TBR last year and I did not get around to. And that book is The Mercies by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. And this book has been on my radar for a while. It has been sitting on my nightstand probably for the last 2 years because I've wanted to get around to reading it and just haven't. And then I remember last year, or was it earlier this year, Rosie from over at Rosie Cockshut read this and basically raved about it for the first half of the year. And so I knew I had to read this and that there was a really good chance that I was going to love it. But it is set in Norway in the 17th century, and it's based on this storm that took place in Scandinavia where like entire ships were sunk and like villages of men were lost on them. And I remember hearing a story that was similar to that when I was in the Faroe Islands, which was part of what drew me to this initially. But also there seems to be some connection to the witch trials here. And I just recently watched a documentary on the witch trials in like Scotland and England with James I and all of that. And it's really, really fascinating. So I feel like combining those two elements into one book is going to be quite a wild ride. I am very, very interested. It also has a stunning cover, and since it is set in Norway, I do feel like this is the perfect wintry type of book. The next book is actually a book set in Iceland, and I actually picked it up when I was on my Icelandic adventure, which I can't honestly believe was a couple of months ago. It feels like I was just there and had such a fabulous time. But I did pick up this book when I was in one of the bookstores in Reykjavik, and that is Summer Light and Then Comes the Night by Jan Kalman Stephenson. And I honestly don't know all that much about the book. It is translated lit because it was written in Icelandic. I think it's won quite a few awards in Iceland, and I have a sneaky suspicion that this is quite literary just because the back of the book doesn't really tell you all that much about the plot. It's very kind of woo and out there and kind of abstract, if that makes any sense, but I do think that it focuses on a rather small village where you have endless sun and then you have no sun at all. And it's really just about the goings on in that village. I do think that it is going to be quite literary, but I did want to give Icelandic literature a try, and since I happened to stumble across an Icelandic bookstore, I was just like, what the hey, why not? What is there to lose? But I do feel like this is going to be the perfect book for winter as well. And then moving on to a book that I think is going to emotionally wreck me, but I am ready for it. We have Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, which I've never read anything by Penelope Lively. Until I saw this book, I had never heard of her as an author either, but there was something about it that gave me like Michael Ondaatje, the English Patient vibes, and that's one of my favorite books of all time, so I figured I'd give it a go. Maybe I discover another author that I'm going to enjoy. And I think part of the reason that it gives me those vibes is because the main character is on her deathbed, similar to how the English patient in The English Patient is also dying when the book begins. And she's recounting her life story, but it seems to revolve largely around three important men in her life. So a brother, a lover and father of her child, and then also like the great love of her life. And so it just seems like I said, there's going to be a lot of emotion here that I'm going to really, really gobble up. It's also a shorter book, which I'm trying to sprinkle in a little bit because I can't read tomes constantly. It is a little bit exhausting, even to me, but I do really think that this book is particularly promising, and it is a modern classic. I think it won a Booker Award. Yes, a Booker Prize winning book. So yeah, that's really my logic behind reading this one. I am kind of excited about it a little bit, but we'll see how I get along with it eventually, I suppose. So the next book is another book that I think is going to be soul-crushing in the best, most satisfying way, and that book is Regeneration by Pat Barker. This is actually a book that I spoke about not that long ago because it was one of the books that I most regretted not getting to in 2021, and so I really wanted to prioritize it at the beginning of 2022. Pat Barker is an author that I am currently obsessed with, and this just feels like a take on World War I that is unlike anything else I've read to date. This is the first book in the trilogy, and I do believe one of the books in the trilogy, if not this one, won like a Booker Prize in the 90s at some point. But essentially, this war hero decides to become like a conscientious objector. He doesn't want to participate in the war anymore, and he's labeled mentally unsound and sent to a hospital where the psychiatrist is meant to rehabilitate him so that he can be sent back into the trenches. And I think it's a lot about sort of the morality of war, but also like being a conscientious objector and the sort of the question for the psychiatrist of whether it is right or wrong to send these men, and in some cases these boys, back into the battlefield where they could potentially be killed. So I do feel like it's going to be really up my alley, but again, I do feel like it's gonna crush me. Either this one or one of the books in the series will crush me. I am positive of that. I'm realizing now that I have quite a few books in translation here. This is the third one, but this is one I added to the list because I do think, again, it's going to be a book that kind of has like a weightiness to the subject matter and to the like emotions that it's going to create and stir up, and that is Catalan Street by Magda Szabo, who is another author that I happen to be obsessed with. I've read 3 other books at this point. This might be one of the last of the books that have been translated into English that I haven't read, but I'm, like all of her books, very, very excited. Her writing style just speaks to me. I think it's about several families that live on a particular street, and in sort of post World War II, only one of those families survives intact. So it ends up being a book that's about the individuals on the street struggling to kind of come to terms with the world in which they are now living. And so I'm really fascinated by this. A few of her books have been set around kind of a similar time period in communist Hungary, or during the war. So this is well-known territory by Magda Szabo, but each of these books has been truly unique and truly flawless. I think I've given all 3 that I've read thus far 5 stars. So I am hyped. The next book is one that I think is going to be absolutely perfect for Black History Month, but when I picked this book up, I was so hyped. You have no idea. As you can tell, most of these books I was particularly hyped about, but this one just spoke to me, and I feel like it could have the same impact on me as like The Street by Ann Petrie, which I also read for Black History Month in 2021. Like, this could be that book for 2022 for me, because this is by a Black female author. I had never heard of her, and yet this book is from like the 1950s or 1960s. It is a modern classic, and I just love finding these gems, and I love talking about them. But the book that I'm talking about is Brown Girl, Brown Stones by Polly Marshall, and it's set during the Depression and in World War II in Brooklyn, so nearby, New York City, one of the boroughs, and during a time period that I am particularly drawn to under normal circumstances. But what is so interesting to me about this book is that the main character, Selena, is the daughter of West Indian immigrants. Her family is from Barbados, and being like related to and descendants of West Indian immigrants from Jamaica, I just feel like there's some sort of kinship with this character. And I also know, like, my grandmother moved to the States during World War II. Like, she was here during this time period. So again, there are like a lot of connections for me with this book, but essentially the main character's mother wants to make a home for them in Brooklyn. She wants to buy a brownstone. She wants to own property. And it sounds like the father wants to return to Barbados. Like, he wants to go back. And so it's really going to be this story of this, like, young woman kind of finding an identity for herself. And I love those stories that are like coming of age stories about the question of identity and all of that stuff. But I just feel like there's a lot in here that I'm going to relate to on some level. All of those connections really got me excited about this book. So I'm hoping to read this in February for Black History Month, as I mentioned, kind of at the top of this little ramble. And then the last book on this list, and actually the only nonfiction book on this list, yikes, is Romantic Outlaws by Charlotte Gordon, which was another book that I regretted not getting to in 2021. So I figured, why not add it to the list for my winter reading? It also happens to be a tome, which, you know, I love them. And as I said, winter just feels like the right time for tomes, even if I read them all year long. But this is a dual biography on Mary Wollstonecraft and her daughter Mary Shelley, and I was really excited about this book when I bought it in 2021 and just didn't get around to reading it. So I do want to attempt it this winter. From everything that I've heard, this book has been received very positively. I've also heard people describe it as very readable. And so I am hopeful that despite the fact that it is quite large, that it's going to be quite enjoyable, quite interesting. I mean, there's a lot of feminism and history about women's rights in here. You also have Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Come on. And it's like, these are just two women who are fascinating as individuals, and when you smush them together as a mother-daughter duo and look at them in that lens, or through that lens rather, like, I just don't see how I could, like, not fall in love with this book. So again, this is a book that I didn't get to in 2021, so we're prioritizing it for the first few months of 2022. So anyway, those are the books that I am so excited to try to read this winter. Hopefully you will see them sprinkled throughout my January, February, and March TBRs, because those are the months that I consider winter, and I am just so hyped about so many of these books. Like, there's so many of them that I think have the potential to be 5 stars. So I really, really want to get to them, and I really hope that I did a good enough job to get you hyped about a couple of them as well. But I do hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, because all of those things help this little channel grow, and they mean the world to me personally. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!